The ship floated in the darkness of space like a metal fish swimming through an ocean of stars. Captain Park stood at the window of his vessel, the Remembrance, watching the distant lights blink and glow. He was a tall man with gray hair at his temples and eyes that had seen many strange worlds. Behind him, his crew worked quietly at their stations, checking instruments and reading data from distant systems. Lieutenant looked up from her screen. She was the science officer, a woman with sharp eyes and a mind that worked faster than most computers. "Captain," she said, her voice calm but serious, "we are receiving a signal. It is very weak, but it is definitely a distress call." Park turned from the window. "Where is it coming from?" "The system, sir. About 3 days' travel from here." The captain felt something move in his chest. The system. He had read about it in the old records, the historical files that most people never bothered to open. 300 years ago, before humanity had spread across the stars, a colony ship called the New Dawn had drifted helplessly in space. Its engines had failed. Its fuel was gone. 40,000 men, women, and children waited to die in the cold darkness between stars. But they did not die. A cargo ship found them. They were a peaceful species, beings made of living crystal who spoke through musical sounds. They had no reason to stop. They had their own destination, their own purpose. But they stopped anyway. They gave the humans fuel. They shared coordinates to a planet where the colonists could live. Then they left, asking for nothing in return. That planet became New Earth. Those 40,000 colonists became the foundation of human civilization among the stars. Everything humanity had built in 3 centuries began with that single act of kindness from strangers. Ensign Lee, a young man with bright eyes and a talent for understanding alien languages, looked up from his station. "Sir, the Galactic Assembly has classified the system as a non-priority zone. Their star is dying. They have no resources worth taking. Most species have abandoned them." Park walked slowly to the center of the bridge. His boots made soft sounds on the metal floor. He looked at his crew, these men and women who had followed him across the galaxy, and he made a decision. "Set a course for Prime," he said. Raised an eyebrow. "Captain, we do not have authorization to enter that region. Command will not be happy." "Command can be unhappy later," Park replied. 300 years ago, they saved our people when they had no reason to. They asked for nothing. They expected nothing. They simply helped because it was the right thing to do." He paused, letting his words settle in the air like dust after a storm. "Now they are calling for help, and we will answer." The ship changed direction, its engines humming with new purpose. For 3 days, the Remembrance traveled through empty space, past dead moons and forgotten asteroids. The crew spoke little, but there was a feeling on the ship that was hard to describe. It was like the feeling before a storm, or the moment before a runner begins a race. Something important was happening. When they finally arrived at Prime, what they saw broke their hearts. The planet was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Great forests of crystal trees covered the surface, glowing with soft colors that shifted like northern lights. But the light was fading. The trees were cracking. The star that had once warmed this world was turning cold and dim, like a fire burning down to its last embers. Ran her instruments over the planet, reading data that made her face grow pale. "The situation is worse than we thought," she said quietly. "Their star is dying faster than anyone predicted. They have maybe 50 years before this world becomes completely uninhabitable. And Captain," she looked at him with eyes full of sadness, "they have no ships, no way to leave. They are trapped here." Lee was listening to the communications channels, his young face serious. "I am picking up their transmissions, sir. They are not panicking. They are not begging. They are simply accepting. They believe no one will come. They are preparing to die with dignity." Park stood very still. 800 million lived on that dying world. 800 million beings of crystal and light, beings whose ancestors had once stopped to help strangers for no reason other than kindness. The galaxy had forgotten them. The Galactic Assembly had written them off as a species already dead. But humanity had not forgotten. The captain walked to the communications panel and pressed the button that would send a message across the stars, all the way back to Earth. He spoke slowly, clearly, making sure every word would be heard and understood by the leaders of his species. "This is Captain Park of the Remembrance. I am transmitting from Prime. 300 years ago, they saved 40,000 of our people. They gave us fuel when our ship was dying. They gave us coordinates to a new home. They asked for nothing in return. Now their world is dying. Their star is failing. They have no ships, no way to escape. The galaxy has abandoned them." He paused, feeling the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders. "They saved our grandparents. Now we must save theirs. I am asking humanity to remember. I am asking humanity to answer. What are we going to do about it?" He released the button and stood in silence. Outside the window, the crystal forests of Prime glowed with fading light, waiting to see if anyone would remember the kindness of strangers. The message from Captain Park traveled across the stars at the speed of light, bouncing through relay stations and communication networks until it reached Earth. Within hours, billions of humans had heard his words. Within days, the entire species was talking about only one thing. The old history files were opened and shared. Children learned in schools about the colony ship New Dawn and the strangers who had saved it. Grandparents told stories they had heard from their grandparents, stories about a time when humanity was weak and lost in the darkness of space. The story spread like fire through dry grass, and with it came a feeling that was hard to put into words. It was shame and gratitude and determination all mixed together. Commander received her orders on a Tuesday morning. She was a fleet admiral with silver stars on her uniform and a reputation for getting impossible things done. When she read what the government was asking, she set down her coffee cup and stared at the document for a long time. Then she smiled. "Well," she said to her assistant, "I always wanted to do something that mattered." 3 weeks later, she arrived at Prime with 15 ships behind her. Captain Park met her at the docking port, his face tired but hopeful. They shook hands without speaking, understanding each other perfectly. The surface of the planet was even more beautiful up close. Led the survey team through forests of crystal trees that sang when the wind touched them. Each tree was different, growing in patterns that looked like frozen music. They themselves were wonderful to see. They stood about 2 meters tall, their bodies made of what looked like living glass. Light moved through them in colors that changed with their emotions. When they spoke, it sounded like bells ringing in harmony. High Resonance was their leader, an ancient being whose crystal body had grown cloudy with age. He met the humans in a great hall made of singing stone, where the walls themselves hummed with old songs. Lee translated as best he could, turning the musical language into words. "Why have you come?" the old asked. There was no hope in his voice, only curiosity. He had stopped hopping long ago. Commander stepped forward. She was not a person who gave long speeches, so she told the story simply. She told him about the New Dawn and the 40,000 colonists who had faced death in the darkness. She told him about the ship that had stopped, that had given fuel and coordinates and asked for nothing. She told him that humanity had remembered. When she finished, the old crystal being was silent for a long time. Colors moved through his body slowly, like clouds drifting across a sky. Finally, he spoke again. "That was so long ago. Different humans. Why would you honor a debt your ancestors owed to our ancestors?" Smiled. "Your ancestors did not calculate the cost when they helped ours," she said. "Neither will we." Back on Earth, Doctor was pulled out of retirement. She was 73 years old and had spent 40 years making dead worlds come alive. Terraforming, they called it. Taking a planet with no air and no water and turning it into a place where life could grow. She had done it 3 times before, and each time had taken decades. Now the government was asking her to do it again, faster than ever before, for beings she had never met. She said yes before they finished asking. Survey ships spread out across the nearby star systems looking for the right world. They needed something with the right minerals, the right gravity, the right distance from a stable star. Most planets were wrong. Too hot, too cold, too small, too big. The search went on for months. Then they found it. 7749b, a dead rock floating in space, circling a young yellow star. It had no atmosphere, no water, nothing living on its surface, but it had everything the wood need. The right crystals in the ground, the right minerals for their bodies, the right amount of light. Doctor looked at the survey data and saw not what the planet was, but what it could become. "This is the one," she said. The government announced Project Gratitude the next morning. The news spread across human space like a wave. 40% of humanity's industrial power would be focused on a single goal, building a new world for the factories that made consumer goods switched to making atmosphere generators. Mining ships changed course to gather the materials that would be needed. Scientists who had studied other things began learning about crystal life forms and what they needed to survive. Other species in the galaxy watched with confusion. A warrior race called it weakness. The who traded in information called it madness. Why would any species spend so much on strangers? What did the humans expect to gain? They did not understand. They could not understand. In a galaxy where every species looked out only for itself, where kindness was calculated and debts were measured in profit, humanity was doing something different. They were remembering. They were paying back what could never truly be repaid. On Prime, High Resonance stood in his singing hall and listened to the news that Lee translated for him. For the first time in many years, colors of hope began to move through his ancient crystal body. Somewhere in the darkness of space, a dead planet was waiting to become a home. And humanity, the strange, soft creatures who remembered what others forgot, had made a promise they intended to keep. The planet had no name that anyone cared about, just numbers and letters in a catalog that no one read. But when the first human ships arrived in orbit, they gave it a new name. New. It would take years before it deserved that name, but the humans liked to name things for what they would become, not what they were. Chief Engineer Ominu stepped off the shuttle and onto the surface of the dead world. His boots crunched on gray dust that had never been touched by any living thing. The sky above was black and empty. No air meant no blue sky, no clouds, no weather of any kind. The sun was just a bright point of light among millions of other lights. It was beautiful in a terrible way, like standing inside a photograph of death. "Well," he said to his team through the radio in his helmet, "let us get to work." They worked, day after day, month after month, year after year. The scale of what they were trying to do was almost impossible to understand. They were not building a city or a country. They were building a world. First came the atmosphere generators, massive machines that broke apart rocks and released the gases trapped inside. Carbon dioxide, nitrogen, oxygen, water vapor. The machines ran day and night, pumping invisible clouds into the empty sky. It would take decades before there was enough air to breathe, but every day the sky grew a little less black. Then came the orbital mirrors, giant sheets of reflective material, each one the size of a city, floating in space above the planet. They caught the light of the sun and directed it downward, warming the frozen ground. Ice that had been locked in the soil for billions of years began to melt. Rivers that had never existed began to flow. Specialist Han was 24 years old when she arrived on Nu. She was an atmospheric engineer, trained to understand how air and water and temperature work together to create weather. On Earth, she had studied old books and run computer simulations. Here, she was helping to build something real. One night, after a 16-hour shift adjusting the gas mixture in Sector 7, she sat on a ridge overlooking a valley that had once been completely dry. Now a thin stream of water ran through it, catching the light of the orbital mirrors. It was the first river on Nu. She had helped create it. A reporter found her there and asked why she was crying. Because someone was kind to us once, she said, wiping her eyes. And we remember. Her words were broadcast across the galaxy. They became famous in a way she never expected. They sent their own people to help. Elder Crystalline was a scientist who had studied mineral formations for 200 years. He worked beside Doctor in the temporary research station, teaching her about biology while learning about human determination. "Your species confuses me," he said one evening. They were sharing tea or something close to tea. His crystal body hummed with colors of deep purple, which meant he was thinking hard. "You are so short-lived. A human works on this project for 30 years and then dies. Another human takes their place and continues. Why? You will not live to see the result. Your children might not live to see it. Why work so hard for something you will never enjoy?" Doctor smiled. She was 81 now, and her hands shook when she held her cup. "Because it is not about us," she said simply. "It is about what we leave behind." Not everyone supported Project Gratitude. Some humans complained about the cost. Some alien species laughed at what they called human foolishness. The Galactic Assembly officially stated that the project was a waste of resources that could be better spent on more viable species. But the work continued. 20 years passed. Chief Engineer Ominu, his hair now completely white, stood on the same spot where he had first stepped onto the dead world. But it was not dead anymore. The sky above was pale blue, not quite right yet but getting closer every year. Thin clouds drifted across it. In the distance, he could see the first crystal trees that gardeners had planted, small but growing. Then the came. Their war fleet appeared at the edge of the system without warning. 50 ships, each one bristling with weapons. They were a warrior species, larger than humans and proud of their strength. They had never lost a war. Their leader, Warlord, sent a message that was heard by everyone on the planet and the ships in orbit. His voice was deep and harsh, like rocks grinding together. "This system falls within our territorial expansion zone. You have one standard day to evacuate. Any human or remaining after that time will be destroyed. This is not a negotiation." Chief Engineer Ominu listened to the message in silence. Around him, workers stopped what they were doing. Machines fell quiet. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the young crystal trees. Then he picked up his communicator and called Commander. "We have a problem," he said. Somewhere between the stars, human warships began to change course. A promise had been made, and humanity intended to keep it, no matter the cost. Admiral had been a soldier for 40 years. He had fought in 3 wars, commanded 5 fleets, and earned every medal his species could give. He was a quiet man who did not like to make speeches or appear on broadcasts. But when the order came to defend New, he did not hesitate for even 1 second. His fleet was smaller than the force, 32 ships against 50. The numbers were bad and the ships were bigger, with more guns and thicker armor. Any reasonable commander would have tried to negotiate. Any reasonable commander would have looked for a way out. Admiral was not interested in being reasonable. "All ships," he said calmly into his communicator, "take defensive positions around the planet. Nothing gets through. Nothing." The warlord watched the human fleet form a protective circle around New. He laughed, a sound like thunder in his command chamber. His advisors laughed with him. The humans were clearly insane. They were going to die for a planet that was not even theirs, for beings that were not even their own species. "This will be quick," said. "Destroy them." The battle began in silence, as all space battles do. There is no sound in the void between stars, no explosions that echo, no screaming of metal. But what happened in those hours would echo through history forever. They expected the humans to fight like most species fought, carefully, defensively, retreating when the odds turned against them. That is not what happened. Human ships that should have pulled back instead charged forward. Crews that should have surrendered instead fought until their ships broke apart around them. Small fighters flew directly into the guns of larger vessels, trading their lives for damage to the enemy. Ambassador watched the battle from Earth, her hands gripping the edge of her desk so hard her knuckles turned white. She was humanity's voice in the Galactic Assembly, a diplomat who solved problems with words instead of weapons. But this problem could not be solved with words. She could only watch and hope. In the silence of space, a human cruiser named Gratitude took a direct hit to its engines. The ship began to drift, unable to move, unable to escape. A destroyer moved closer, preparing to finish it off. The captain of the Gratitude was a young woman named. She was 29 years old. She had a daughter waiting for her on Earth, a little girl who liked to draw pictures of stars. Knew she was going to die, but she also knew what her ship was named and what that name meant. She ordered her remaining weapons to fire everything at once. The explosion destroyed both ships. This happened again and again throughout the battle. Human ships fighting beyond what anyone thought possible. Human crews refusing to give up even when giving up was the only logical choice. And slowly, impossibly, the fleet began to lose. Warlord could not understand what was happening. His ships were bigger, his weapons were stronger, his warriors were trained for war from birth. How were the humans winning? He opened a communication channel to Admiral. Why? He demanded. Why do you fight so hard for a world that is not yours, for creatures that are not your own blood? Admiral looked at the face of his enemy on the screen. He was tired. He had lost 11 ships and thousands of good people, but his voice was steady when he answered. 300 years ago, strangers helped strangers. Beings we had never met stopped their journey to save our dying ship. They gave us fuel when we had none. They gave us hope when we had lost it. They asked for nothing in return. He paused, letting the words sink in. That kindness gave us a future, and we will die before we let that debt go unpaid. The battle lasted 6 more hours. When it was over, the fleet was broken. 23 of their ships were destroyed. The rest retreated, jumping away into the darkness of space as fast as their damaged engines could carry them. The human fleet had lost 14 ships. Thousands had died, but Nu was safe. Ambassador stood before the Galactic Assembly the next day. The Great Hall was filled with representatives from 100 species, all watching her with different expressions. Some were shocked, some were afraid, some were curious. She spoke without notes, her voice clear and strong. Yesterday, they attacked a world that humanity was building for the. They expected us to negotiate. They expected us to retreat. They did not understand why we would sacrifice so much for another species. She looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of beings from across the galaxy. So let me explain. Humanity remembers its friends. We remember those who helped us when we were weak, when we were lost, when we had nothing to offer in return. We build monuments to kindness. We write songs about those who showed us mercy. And when those friends need us, we come, not because it is profitable, not because it is logical, but because it is right. She let the silence stretch for a long moment. They will have their new home. Anyone who threatens them threatens us. This is not a warning, it is a promise. She smiled, and there was something in that smile that made the warriors in the room uncomfortable. Humanity remembers its friends. We also remember those who threaten them. Choose carefully which you wish to be. She turned and walked out of the hall. Behind her, the galaxy began to whisper. 50 years after Captain Park first answered a distress call from a dying world, the sky above Nu was the color of amethyst at sunset. Crystal trees covered the hills and valleys, singing in harmonies that could be heard for miles. Rivers of clean water flowed through channels of living stone. 800 million walked under that purple sky, their crystalline bodies catching the light of a star that would burn for billions of years. The dedication ceremony drew visitors from across the galaxy. Ships of every shape and size filled the space above the planet, carrying representatives from dozens of species. Some came because they were curious. Some came because they were afraid of what humanity had proven itself capable of, and some came because they were beginning to feel something strange stirring in their own hearts, something that felt like hope. President Shin stood on a platform made of singing crystal, looking out at the crowd below. She was the leader of the United Human Federation, a woman with kind eyes and a voice that carried without needing to shout. Beside her stood High Resonance, ancient beyond measure, his crystal body now almost completely cloudy with age. He did not have much time left, but he had lived long enough to see his people saved. Captain Park was there too, an old man now with more white in his hair than black. He sat in a place of honor, watching the world he had helped to save. Sat beside him, still sharp-eyed after all these years. Lee stood nearby, his gift for languages now famous throughout human space. "We are gathered here today," President Shin began, "to celebrate something that many said was impossible. 50 years ago, a dying species sent a message into the darkness, hoping someone would hear. Humanity heard. We answered. And today we complete what we promised." High Resonance moved forward, his ancient form humming with colors that shifted between joy and sorrow. When he spoke, Lee translated his singing words into human speech. "Long ago, a ship found a human vessel drifting in space. Our ancestors did not know who these strange creatures were. They did not calculate the cost of helping or the benefit of leaving them to die. They simply saw beings in need and chose to help." He turned to look at the world around him, at the crystal forests and the flowing rivers and the purple sky. "We gave them fuel, they gave us a world." The crowd was silent. On screens across the galaxy, billions watched and listened. Young Resonance came forward then. She was the granddaughter of, born on New, the first generation of her people to never know the dying world of their ancestors. Her crystal body was clear and bright, filled with colors that had not been seen for centuries. Colors of hope, colors of a future. "We will not forget," she said, her voice ringing like bells across the platform. "What humanity has given us cannot be measured or repaid, but we can pass it on. We can become what they have been to us. A species that remembers, a species that helps without calculating the cost, a species that answers when others call." President Shin nodded and stepped forward again. "Today we announce something new, the Gratitude Initiative. Humanity has searched our historical records. We have found every species that ever showed us kindness, no matter how small. A medicine shared, shelter offered, knowledge given freely. We remember them all." She paused, letting her words echo through the crowd and across the stars. "To every species that helped us when we were weak, we are strong now, and we are coming, not to conquer, not to demand, but to repay what can never truly be repaid. You helped us when we had nothing. Now we will help you with everything we have." The crowd began to murmur. Representatives from other species looked at each other with wide eyes. Some remembered small kindnesses they had shown to humans centuries ago. Others remembered kindnesses they had received and never returned. The galaxy was beginning to change. That night there was a celebration on New that lasted until dawn. Humans danced together under the purple sky, learning each other's songs, sharing each other's stories. The crystal trees sang harmonies that had not been heard since the ancient days of old. For one night, the galaxy forgot about war and profit and calculation. For one night, there was only joy. Captain Park slipped away from the celebration as the first sun began to rise. He was tired in his bones, the deep tiredness that comes with age and satisfaction. He found a quiet hill overlooking a valley of crystal trees and sat down to watch the light spread across the world he had helped to save. A communication device beeped in his pocket. He pulled it out and read the message. It was a distress call from a species called A plague was spreading through their worlds. Their population was dying. They had no cure. They were begging anyone who would listen for help. Park smiled. He remembered 200 years ago, a healer had developed a treatment that saved a human colony from a similar plague. The healer had shared the cure freely, asking for nothing in return. He pressed the button to respond and spoke clearly into the device. "This is Captain Park, retired, of the United Human Federation. I have received your message. Please stand by. Help is coming." Then he called the Fleet Command Center and said the words that would launch 1,000 ships. "Prep the fleet, we have a debt to pay." Below him, the crystal trees sang their morning songs. Above him, the purple sky brightened with the light of a new day. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, human ships were already changing course, carrying gratitude and hope to strangers who would not remain strangers for long. The galaxy had watched humanity reshape a planet for the sake of an old kindness. Now they would watch something even more powerful. They would watch that kindness multiply, spreading from world to world, species to species, until the very nature of the galaxy began to change. Because humanity never forgot a kindness, and their response could reshape not just planets but the stars themselves.